Hey, good afternoon, class. Welcome back. Welcome to week 5 of introductory psychology. I'm having some technical issues today, so instead of my desktop, I'm having to use my laptop. So the angle is a little bit different for me. Sorry, it's throwing me off a little bit. I've got my desktop working right here, but for whatever reason, the camera's not working. So technology, roll with the punches. But welcome back. I'm recording this on a Saturday. Not that it really matters a whole lot to you, because I don't think I'm even going to post this until Sunday, and that's probably not even, you'll see it then anyway. So, OU just got done playing and won, and as I speak, I think OSU is playing, so I wish I had better news to say that OU and OSU both won, but unfortunately, I can only vouch for one team. But hopefully by the time you're hearing this, maybe, we're 2-0 in the state, so, anyways. So, week 5, can you already believe it? We're 5 weeks into the course, we're already 5 chapters in. It's blowing my mind. I can't believe we're already over a month in. So, and September is already flying by. Oh my gosh, time really flies when you're learning and you're busy and you're in the grind of learning. It just kind of seems like everything is going 100 miles per hour. At least for me it is. So, anyways, so let's talk about this week. Exam 1, as of right now, I think only a couple of you take it, and that's okay, but just know that it is due Monday night at 11:59 p.m., and again, just a friendly reminder, it will close promptly at 11:59 p.m., whether you are finished or not, so please, please, please make sure that you finish the exam, or you take the exam in a timely manner and give yourself enough time. Please don't wait until like 11:30 Monday night, and because I can't really help you out a lot if you procrastinate for that long. But if you need more time in terms of if you're kind of waiting a little bit to study some more and take your exam maybe like Monday afternoon or Sunday or whatever, that's perfectly fine. But please just don't wait until the last minute. So the scores so far have been great. I'm really excited to see the rest of the scores and see how well you all did. See how your hard work and effort will pay off, so I'm really looking forward to that. So that's sort of the big item for this week. If you haven't taken exam, number 1, you need to do so by Monday night. Once you are finished, it is now time to move on to our next chapter, where we can't dwindle too far into the past. We've got to keep moving forward. So this week we're going to jump into, of course, the chapter that follows chapter 4, which is chapter 5. And it's the chapter titled simply Learning. So it sounds really meta and a little weird, but you are going to be learning about learning this week. So it's a very sort of strange thing to think about when you say it out loud, but I think because we've been learning our entire lives. We wouldn't be here in a college course without learning, but learning obviously takes place not only in classrooms, but it also takes place outside in the world. We're always constantly learning based on our experiences. So this will give you some more theoretical perspectives on how learning takes place, and a lot of what we're going to be studying can be applied to all organisms, especially when we talk about classical conditioning. But many of the principles I want you to think about in terms of your own learning, think about how humans learn. So chapter 5, if you jump into chapter 5, the first objective for this chapter is simply to define what learning is. You've been learning your entire life. Now you're going to get a nice formal definition. Learning ideally leads to changes in behavior, permanent changes in the way we behave, the way we think, the way we act. So think about it, learning in those terms. There should be some sort of permanent change to the individual, to the organism, whatever. Then we're going to get into some very specific theories about learning, the first of which is going to be classical conditioning. You've maybe heard that term before. Maybe you've heard of Pavlov and his dogs before. There's a really famous experiment where Pavlov rings the bell and gets the dogs to salivate, and eventually, the dog, by pairing the food with the ringing of the bell over and over, and eventually all Pavlov had to do is ring the bell and the dog starts salivating. Well, fun fact, Pavlov actually never used a bell. Everything else is still the same, but he actually used a tuning fork, and I think your textbook will talk about why. So if you've heard it, if you've heard this story before and described as using a bell, that's slightly misleading. You didn't actually use a bell, but the principle holds true. So you're going to be looking at classical conditioning. You're going to be able to describe the principles. You're going to be able to apply principles of classical conditioning. And then afterwards, you're going to switch gears and look at operant conditioning. And this is the type of learning that takes place with consequences, with voluntary behaviors. This is the type of learning from rewards and punishments, or in the lingo of psychology, we refer to it as reinforcement and punishment. And this is where it gets really, really tricky. There are a lot of misconceptions about operant conditioning that you probably already have coming into this classroom. For one, you probably already, or many of you may perhaps associate the term negative reinforcement with punishment. And I want to go ahead and dispel that now, that negative reinforcement and punishment are not the same thing. Positive and negative do not mean the same thing in psychology as they do in the real world. I should say that, sometimes we think of positive and negative as good and bad, but in psychology, all that means is addition and subtraction. I want you to think about it mathematically. So when we talk about positive reinforcement, what we're talking about is reinforcing a behavior, encouraging a behavior by adding something. Negative reinforcement, on the other hand, is we're going to take something away to reinforce your behavior. So maybe, when you were a kid growing up, if you made good grades in class, your parents might have said, hey, you made a good grade on your math test, so when you come home today, you don't have to do the dishes. We're so proud of you for doing well in school. You don't have to do any chores today. They're trying to reinforce your behavior by taking something away that you don't like. And the same thing works with punishment. There's positive and negative punishment. And you're thinking to yourself, there's no such thing as positive punishment. Punishment's bad. But again, please don't think of it in terms of good and bad. There's no value judgments in psychology, or at least when we're talking about reinforcement and punishment. So that's just my quick aside. And then after you learn about operant conditioning and how it applies, you're going to switch gears and look at cognitive factors involved in learning, specifically looking at observational learning, the type of learning that takes place when we observe somebody else. A lot of learning takes place that way. We simply watch other people perform. We learn vicariously through others. So there's a lot of different ways that human beings learn. So 3 broad ways. We're talking about classical conditioning is learning of involuntary reflexive behaviors. Operant conditioning is learning voluntary behaviors, rewards and punishments, or reinforcement and punishment, I should say. And then finally, observational learning is the learning that takes place of observing other people. So that's the big 3 kind of theoretical perspectives that you're going to learn about in this chapter, and a few other minor things in this chapter, but that's the big focus. So this week's discussion, I want you to come up with your own examples of things that you have learned via classical conditioning and operant conditioning. So I want you to think about voluntary reflexive behaviors and voluntary behaviors that you've learned over the course of your lifetime. So for example, I'll give you an example. In my own lifetime, I don't know, for whatever reason, my dad told me that, be careful. Sometimes, when people are mowing their yard or weed eating, that rocks will fly up and could hit you in the face. And ever since my dad told me that when I was really young, anytime I drive by or walk by somebody who's mowing their yard, I kind of naturally turn my head away from them if I get too close. I've always been deathly afraid of something flying up and hitting me, and sometimes I do it without even thinking about it. That's the kind of behaviors I want you to talk about in terms of classical conditioning, something that you do and maybe don't even think about why you do it. And then with operant conditioning, maybe something that you learn because your parents, your teachers may have reinforced or punished the behavior to change or morph your behavior. I think about, as a runner, I like to run, and I like running for the intrinsic sake of running, but I also enjoy getting a medal at the end of a run. It makes me feel like my hard work is paid off. Here's something tangible that I can hold up and show, say, hey, I did a good job. So I like that stuff. I would say that's a form of positive reinforcement. So for this week's discussion, I want you to think about your own personal examples of both operant and classical conditioning. And I want you to use the specific terminology associated with each one. And I've outlined that in this week's discussion. So I'm going to be pretty picky. So if your discussion post is missing some of those elements, or maybe you're not describing them as well as I think you can, I'm going to probably chime in and say, hey, come on, elaborate a little more. So be prepared for that. And I just think there's a lot of misconceptions about this stuff. So I want it to be pretty clear. You may not get it right now, the first time around, but I think eventually, through coming up with your own examples, it's going to be very helpful. So there's that. That's the discussion post. It's due on Friday. Remember to get your initial post in by Wednesday for a timely post. And of course, we're back to doing response papers as well. I have posted a very a short TED Talk about operant and classical conditioning that I want you to watch. It's only about 5 minutes long, and it just compares and contrasts the two, because I really want to reinforce how important this topic is, and for you to be able to understand the difference between the two. So my recommendation is watch the video before you do your discussion posts, because I think it'll give you some better understanding about these two concepts, operant versus classical conditioning. So watch that video, complete the response paper. I want you to, the 3 questions, give me a summary, tell me what you found interesting, and then tell me how it applies to you. Tie it right back to the TED Talk. Tie it to the TED Talk specifically. So that's really it for week number 5. Finish the exam. If you haven't done so, make sure you read chapter 5. Complete this week's discussion post on operant and classical conditioning, and be very detailed, be very specific. Make sure you're using the terminology correctly. If you have any questions before you post, shoot me an email and I can let you know if you're on the right track or not. And then, of course, complete response paper number 4. That is due, uploaded to Dropbox by next Sunday. So a week from tomorrow. Again, I'm recording this on a Saturday, but probably won't post it until Sunday. So it really doesn't matter, I guess, for you all, for your purposes. But that's about it. Please respond to the email that I send out if you have any questions or concerns. Post any questions or concerns you have on the forum. I'll be glad to help in any way possible. I know this stuff might be a little dense this week and might be kind of tough to wrap your head around, but I promise if you can put it in your own terms and your own real world examples, it's going to make so much more sense. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave you be. Look forward to seeing the rest of your exam scores, and I look forward to seeing your discussion posts and reflections this week. So I will see you all next week. All right, take care. Bye.